Why tinnitus often becomes more noticeable in quiet environments. Now, if you've ever noticed that your tinnitus feels louder at night or when you're in a quiet room, you're not imagining it, and it doesn't automatically mean your tinnitus is getting worse. Now, in this episode, I'll explain why silence can change how tinnitus is perceived, what's happening in the auditory system and the brain, and why this experience is so common. Now, this is an educational discussion based on lived experiences, my own, and reputable sources, not medical advice. One of the most common things people with tinnitus notice is that it often feels louder in quiet environments. This might be at night when you're trying to sleep or when you're sitting alone in a quiet room. For many people this can be worrying because silence feels like it should make things calmer, not more noticeable. What's important to understand is that this experience is extremely common, and in most cases it doesn't mean tinnitus is getting worse or that new damage is happening. To make this more concrete, imagine being in a busy cafe. Even if a clock is ticking on the wall, you probably won't notice it at all. But if that cafe suddenly empties and goes quiet, that same ticking can feel surprisingly loud. The sound hasn't changed, your awareness of it has. Tinnitus in quiet environments works in a very similar way. Silence removes competition, so internal sounds stand out more. To understand why this happens, it helps to think about how the auditory system normally works. Our ears and brain don't just receive sound passively, they're constantly processing, filtering and prioritising what we hear. During the day there's usually a lot of external sound, voices, traffic, music, background noise, all of that sound competes for attention. When those external sounds reduce, especially in silence, the auditory system doesn't simply switch off. Instead, internal sounds, including tinnitus, can become more noticeable because there's less else to focus on. A question many people naturally ask at this point is whether silence itself is harmful, or whether being in quiet environments makes tinnitus worse. For most people, silence isn't damaging. What changes is perception, not injury. Understanding that difference can be important because it helps separate what feels alarming from what's actually happening. A helpful way to think about this is like a microphone in a quiet room. When there's very little external sound, sensitivity effectively gets turned up. In that situation, even small internal signals stand out more clearly. With tinnitus, silence removes competition. The sound hasn't necessarily changed, but the contrast has. One thing that can be confusing about this is that tinnitus can feel more intrusive in silence even though nothing new has happened. Many people assume that if something feels louder, it must mean it's getting worse. But with tinnitus, that isn't always the case. What's often changing is awareness rather than sound itself. This distinction matters. This distinction matters because misunderstanding it can create unnecessary worry, which can then make tinnitus even more noticeable. This is why tinnitus often feels louder in quiet environments, even if the actual signal is the same. What's changed is awareness, not volume. When there's nothing else to listen to, tinnitus naturally moves to the foreground of perception. Attention plays a big role here as well. During the day, attention is pulled outward: work, conversations, screens, movement. In quiet environments, especially at night, attention has fewer places to go. When that happens, the brain tends to scan inward, and tinnitus becomes one of the most noticeable signals available. Nighttime adds another layer. Fatigue, stress and mental quite often surface when the day ends. These factors can influence how strongly sensations are perceived, including sound. That's one reason many people notice tinnitus more when they're tired, stressed, or trying to fall asleep. Now, this doesn't automatically mean tinnitus is worsening at night. It is usually about perception awareness, not damage. There are a few common misunderstandings around tinnitus and silence that are worth clearing up. One of them is the idea that silence itself is harmful, or that being in quiet environments make tinnitus worse over time. For most people, that isn't the case. Silence changes awareness, not damage. Another common concern is that noticing tinnitus more means it's becoming permanent or progressing. While tinnitus can change over time, noticing it more in certain situations doesn't automatically mean it's worsening. And finally, people worry that if they can't ignore tinnitus in silence, they're doing something wrong. In reality, awareness naturally comes and goes. The brain doesn't respond on command, and fluctuations are a normal part of the experience. Understanding these points can help reduce some of the fear around quiet environments, which is often what makes tinnitus feel more intrusive in the first place. Understanding this can be reassuring. Many people with tinnitus experience these fluctuations, and awareness can change over time as the brain becomes more familiar with the sound. Noticing tinnitus more in silence is one of the most common reported experiences among people with tinnitus. Another point that's worth mentioning is that everyone's experience of tinnitus is different. Some people notice it more in silence, others notice it more during stress, or for some it fluctuates without a clear pattern. That variability is one of the reasons tinnitus can be so difficult to describe and compare between people. Hearing that your experience is common, even if it isn't identical to someone else's, can be reassuring in itself. For a lot of people, the most difficult part of tinnitus isn't the sound itself, but the uncertainty around it. Not knowing why it feels louder at certain times, or worrying that noticing it more means something is going wrong, can make the experience more stressful than it needs to be. Gaining a clearer understanding of why tinnitus behaves differently in quiet environments doesn't make it disappear, but it can make it feel less mysterious and less threatening. And for many people, that understanding alone can make a real difference in how they relate to it. In future episodes, I'll explore related topics like sound environments, stress, sleep, and how people commonly describe their experiences with tinnitus, always from an educational perspective. If this explanation was helpful, feel free to subscribe for future discussions. Thanks for listening to this episode from the David Health Channel.